There are moments in life when everything you believed about humanity gets tested in a single heartbeat. For four young sisters, standing on an auction block in 1878 Wyoming, that moment came when their own uncle decided their lives were worth nothing more than cold cash. The crowd pressed closer, eager to claim them, when a quiet mountain man named Silas Brennan stepped forward. He was known throughout the territory as a loner who kept to the high country. Without hesitation, he bought all four sisters. The girls expected the worst. But what Silas had waiting for them up in those mountains would change their lives forever. What could make four terrified young women finally feel safe again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other nightmare. Eleanor Whitfield stood on the rough wooden platform in the center of Timber Ridge's dusty main street, her three younger sisters pressed close behind her. At 23, she was the eldest, and the weight of that responsibility had never felt heavier than it did in this moment. Catherine, 20 years old and fierce even in terror, gripped Eleanor's hand so tightly her fingers had gone numb. Mary, 17 and tender-hearted, kept her eyes fixed on the ground, tears streaming silently down her pale cheeks. And Sarah, just 14, trembled like a leaf in autumn wind, her small frame tucked between her older sisters, as if they could somehow shield her from what was about to happen. The auction block. The very words tasted like ash in Eleanor's mouth. 6 months ago, she would never have believed such a place could exist in her world, let alone that she and her sisters would be standing on one. 6 months ago, their parents had still been alive. 6 months ago, they'd had a home, a future, hope. Their father, Thomas Whitfield, had been a good man who worked a modest but productive farm 15 miles south of Timber Ridge. Their mother, Grace, had filled their home with warmth and laughter, teaching her daughters to read and write, to cook and sew, to face the world with dignity and strength. The Whitfield farm hadn't made them wealthy, but it had given them something more valuable than gold, security, love, and the promise of respectable futures. Then came the accident. A wagon wheel had shattered on the rocky trail during a spring storm. The wagon had tumbled down a steep embankment, taking both parents with it. Thomas and Grace Whitfield had died instantly, the local doctor said, as if that information brought any comfort to four orphaned daughters trying to make sense of a world suddenly turned cruel and cold. Uncle Jasper had arrived 3 days after the funeral. Jasper Whitfield was Thomas's older brother, a man Eleanor's father had rarely mentioned, and never with any warmth. Now she understood why. Jasper had swept into their grief-stricken home with papers and proclamations, declaring himself their legal guardian. He had kind words at first, promises of protection and care. Eleanor, overwhelmed by loss and responsibility, had wanted to believe him. The belief lasted less than a week. Jasper sold the farm within the month, pocketing every cent. He moved the sisters into a cramped room above the saloon in Timber Ridge, where the noise and debauchery below invaded their sleepless nights. The inheritance their father had carefully saved money meant for the sisters' futures, for marriages or businesses or simply for security, disappeared into Jasper's pockets and then into the bottom of whiskey bottles at every gambling table in the territory. Catherine had confronted him first, demanding an accounting of their parents' money. Jasper had backhanded her across the face, hard enough to split her lip. The message was clear: they were his property now, and he would do with them as he pleased. What pleased him, apparently, was to sell them. Eleanor clutched the small silver locket hanging around her neck, the only possession she'd managed to keep through these terrible months. Inside was a tiny portrait of her mother on one side and her father on the other. She'd worn it every day since their deaths, drawing what comfort she could from their painted faces. Now, as rough men circled the auction block like wolves eyeing prey, she pressed the locket against her heart and prayed her parents couldn't see this moment from wherever they'd gone. Timber Ridge wasn't a large town, but it attracted a certain kind of man. prospectors heading into the mountains, trappers coming down from the high country, drifters and gamblers, and men running from something in their past. The frontier had a way of collecting people who didn't quite fit anywhere else. Some were decent folks trying to build honest lives in hard country. Others were predators who thrived in places where law was scarce and mercy even scarcer. The men gathering around the auction block this cold autumn morning fell decidedly into the latter category. Eleanor recognized some of them. There was Dutch Kerner, who ran a mining operation up in the hills and had a reputation for working his laborers to death. Standing beside him was Frank Morrison, a rancher whose previous 2 wives had both died under mysterious circumstances. She saw the Garrett brothers, known for their violent tempers and cruel treatment of anyone weaker than themselves, and there were others, strangers, whose eyes held nothing but calculation and hunger. The auctioneer, a weasel-faced man named Simmons, stepped onto the platform beside the sisters. He'd done this before Eleanor could tell by his practiced movements, the casual way he positioned them for better viewing. The realization made her stomach turn. How many other desperate people had stood where she stood now? How many had been sold like livestock while a town watched and did nothing? "Gentlemen," Simmons called out, his voice carrying across the street. 4 fine young women, all healthy and capable. The eldest is educated, can read and write. All of them know cooking, sewing, and farm work. Starting bid is $50 each, or $200 for the lot. Catherine made a sound like a wounded animal. Mary's crying intensified. Sarah pressed her face against Eleanor's back, her small body shaking with sobs. Eleanor forced herself to stand straight, to meet the eyes of the men below with as much dignity as she could muster. If this was to be her fate, she would face it without cowering. The bidding started immediately. Dutch Kerner offered $50 for Sarah, the youngest. The Garrett brothers countered with $60 each for Catherine and Mary. Frank Morrison bid $75 for Eleanor herself, a calculating look in his cold eyes. The numbers climbed, the men's voices growing more animated as they bargained over human lives, like they were discussing the price of horses. Eleanor felt something inside her breaking. Not just her heart, though that was shattered beyond repair. Something deeper, her faith in humanity, perhaps, or her belief that the world contained any justice at all. Her parents had been good people. She and her sisters had done nothing wrong. Yet here they stood, being sold to the highest bidder, while the town went about its business as if this were nothing more than a livestock auction. The bidding reached $150 per sister when the stranger stepped forward. He emerged from the morning shadows like a ghost materializing from mist, tall and weathered, with a thick beard going grey and eyes that had seen too many hard winters. He wore buckskin and wool, clothes made for mountain weather and long silences. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but Eleanor could see the deep lines carved there by wind and sun and time. The crowd parted for him without seeming to realize they were doing it. Even the loudest bidders fell quiet as he approached the platform. There was something about him not threatening exactly, but absolutely certain. A man who knew exactly who he was and had no interest in pretending otherwise. Silas Brennan. Eleanor had heard the name whispered in town, though she'd never seen the man himself. The mountain man who came to Timber Ridge twice a year for supplies, paid in gold dust and furs, then disappeared back into the high country. People said he'd lived up there for 15 years or more, alone except for his horses and his solitude. They said he'd been something else before, a lawman, some claimed, or a soldier. Others insisted he'd killed a man and fled to the mountains to escape justice. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: Silas Brennan was not a man to cross. He stepped up to the auctioneer's table without a word. From his coat, he produced a leather pouch that landed on the wood with a heavy thunk. The sound of gold was unmistakable. "How much for all 4? His voice was quiet, rough from disuse, but it carried. Simmons blinked, calculated quickly. $200 takes the lot, as I said. But these gentlemen here, 300. Silas opened the pouch, and Eleanor glimpsed the gleam of gold coins inside, more money than she'd seen in her entire life. 300 gold dollars for all four sisters. No one else bids. The way he said it wasn't a request, it wasn't even quite a threat, it was simply a statement of fact. The other bidders looked at the mountain man, looked at the gold, and apparently decided their interest wasn't worth whatever confrontation might follow. One by one, they backed away, melting into the dispersing crowd. Simmons counted the gold with shaking fingers, then nodded. Sold. The four Whitfield sisters, to Silas Brennan. And just like that, Eleanor's life changed hands for the second time in 6 months. She looked down at the mountain man, trying to read something, anything, in his weathered face. What did he want with 4 young women? The possibilities that flooded her mind made her feel sick. Silas looked up, met her eyes briefly. What she saw there surprised her. Not the hunger she'd seen in the other bidders' faces, not cruelty or lust or any of the things she'd feared, just a deep, bone-weary sadness, and something else she couldn't quite name. Then he turned away, heading toward a wagon hitched at the end of the street. "Come on," he said quietly. Not an order, exactly, but not quite a request either. Eleanor gathered her sisters close. They clung to each other, 4 terrified young women with nowhere else to go and no other choice to make. Together, they climbed down from the auction block for the last time and followed the mountain man toward whatever fate awaited them in the high country. Behind them, Timber Ridge returned to its morning routine. The auction was over, 4 more lives bought and sold, and the world moved on, as if it mattered not at all. But Eleanor Whitfield touched her mother's locket one more time and made herself a silent promise. Whatever happened next, whatever this Silas Brennan intended, she would protect her sisters. She would survive, and somehow, some way, she would find a path forward through this nightmare. She had no idea that the mountain man walking ahead of them was thinking almost the exact same thing. The wagon rolled out of Timber Ridge, with the morning sun barely clearing the eastern peaks. Silas Brennan sat at the front, reins loose in his weathered hands, saying nothing. Behind him, huddled together in the wagon bed among supplies and bundles, the 4 Whitfield sisters held each other and tried not to imagine what horrors awaited them. Eleanor kept her arms around Sarah, feeling the girl's rapid heartbeat against her side. Catherine sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes scanning their surroundings as if memorizing an escape route. Mary wept silently, her tears soaking into Eleanor's sleeve. None of them spoke. What was there to say? The trail climbed steadily from the moment they left town. Timber Ridge sat in a valley where 3 streams converged, providing water for the settlement and the surrounding ranches. But Silas turned the wagon north, following a narrow track that wound into the mountains proper. The terrain grew rougher, the air thinner and colder. Pine forests closed in on either side, their shadows deep and primordial. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher but provided little warmth. Eleanor watched Silas's back, trying to understand the man who'd bought them. He sat easy in the seat despite the rough trail, moving with the wagon's rhythm, like he and it were part of the same organism. Occasionally he'd make a small sound, not quite words, more like quiet communication with the horses, and they'd adjust their pace or direction without him touching the reins. A man comfortable in wilderness, a man who belonged to these mountains in a way he probably never belonged to towns or people. Around midday, Silas pulled the wagon off the trail into a small clearing beside a creek. He climbed down, moved to the back, and lowered the tailgate. The sisters pressed together, uncertain. "Need to rest the horses," Silas said, his voice rough from disuse. "There's bread and dried meat in that sack. Creek water's safe to drink." He gestured to a canvas bag, then walked away to tend the animals. Eleanor waited until he was occupied with the horses before moving. She opened the sack cautiously, found exactly what he'd said: fresh bread wrapped in cloth, strips of dried venison, even a small jar of honey. Her stomach cramped with hunger. None of them had eaten since yesterday. "Is it safe?" Mary whispered. Eleanor looked at the food, then at Silas's back. "I don't know, but we need to eat." They shared the meal in silence, taking small bites, making it last. The bread was good, baked recently. The meat was well prepared, seasoned with herbs. Someone who knew what they were doing had made this food. The thought was oddly unsettling. It suggested planning, preparation. How long had Silas been intending to buy them? Catherine was the first to speak what they were all thinking. "We should run." "Run where?" Eleanor kept her voice low. "We're miles from town. We don't know these mountains. Better to die trying." Then Catherine couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't know what he intends," Eleanor said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "Don't we?" Catherine's eyes were hard. "Men don't buy women for noble reasons." Sarah whimpered, and Eleanor pulled her closer. "We stay together. We watch for opportunities. But right now, running would be suicide." It wasn't courage that kept them in the wagon. It was cold calculation of survival odds. Eleanor hated that she had to think this way, that her life had been reduced to such grim arithmetic. But leadership meant facing reality, and reality said the wilderness would kill them faster than whatever Silas Brennan might do. They climbed back into the wagon when Silas indicated it was time. The afternoon wore on. The trail grew steeper, narrower. Several times Eleanor thought they'd reached an impassable section, but Silas guided the horses through with practiced ease. This was a man who knew every rock and turn, who'd traveled this route so many times it was written in his bones. As the sun began its descent, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine leaned close to Eleanor. "He's taking us somewhere specific. This isn't wandering. He knows exactly where he's going." Eleanor had noticed the same thing. It didn't comfort her. They made camp as twilight settled over the mountains. Silas chose a spot where an overhang of rock provided shelter and the creek offered water. He built a fire with quick efficiency, set a pot of beans to cook, then laid out bedrolls. "You four sleep there." He pointed to the area beneath the overhang, farthest from the trail. "I'll be here." He indicated a spot between them and the outside world. Eleanor understood the positioning. Whether it was to protect them or prevent escape, she couldn't say. Probably both. They ate the beans in silence. Silas offered them tin cups of coffee that tasted better than Eleanor expected. The warmth was welcome as the mountain cold crept in with the darkness. She noticed Silas had given them the better blankets, keeping a thinner one for himself. Small kindness, or calculated move to keep valuable property healthy. She hated that her mind worked this way now, seeing predators in every gesture. As the fire burned low, Mary finally found the courage to speak. "What are you going to do with us?" Silas looked up from the flames. In the firelight, his face was all shadows and hard edges. "Taking you somewhere safe." "Safe for who?" Catherine's voice held an edge sharp enough to cut. Something flickered in Silas's eyes. "Pain, maybe. Or memory. Safe for you. All of you." "Why should we believe that?" Eleanor heard herself ask. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, heavy with something that sounded almost like regret. "You shouldn't. Not yet. But tomorrow you'll see." "See what?" Sarah's small voice trembled. "That some folks do the right thing, even when it's 20 years too late." The words made no sense, but something in the way he said them, the weight of old grief, the burden of carried guilt, made Eleanor pause. She studied him across the fire, this strange mountain man who'd bought 4 terrified women and was taking them gods knew where. "You had a sister," Eleanor said suddenly, not knowing where the words came from. Silas's head snapped up, his eyes sharp and surprised. For a moment she thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then his expression softened, crumpled slightly, and he nodded. "Had. Long time ago. he stood abruptly. Get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. He walked to the edge of the firelight and stood there with his back to them, a silhouette against the stars. Eleanor saw his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, saw him raise one hand to his face, though whether to wipe away tears or simply rub tired eyes, she couldn't tell. The sisters huddled together under their blankets. Catherine whispered, "What was that about?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "But whatever happened to his sister, it matters. It matters enough that—" She stopped, not wanting to voice the fragile hope forming in her mind. They took turns sleeping that night, never all of them unconscious at once. Eleanor took the last watch, sitting up in the pre-dawn darkness while her sisters finally succumbed to exhaustion. She watched Silas, who sat motionless near the dying fire. He hadn't slept at all, she realized. Just sat there through the whole night, keeping watch, protecting them, or guarding them. When the first light touched the peaks, Silas stood and began breaking camp. He moved quietly, not waking the others until coffee was ready and breakfast prepared. Eleanor didn't know which anymore, and the uncertainty exhausted her more than the sleepless night. They ate cold biscuits and bacon, drank coffee that burned away the morning chill, then back in the wagon, climbing higher into mountains that seemed to touch the sky itself. The air grew thin enough that breathing required effort. Snow clung to shaded areas despite the season. They'd left the world Eleanor knew behind, ascending into something primal and untouched. Around midday, Silas pulled the wagon to a stop. "Just over this rise," he said. It was the most he'd spoken since the previous night. Eleanor's heart hammered. This was it. Whatever Silas intended, whatever fate awaited them, it lay just beyond the ridge ahead. She gathered her sisters close, felt them trembling against her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Silas climbed down, came around to lower the tailgate. "Come on, need to walk from here. Road's too narrow for the wagon." They climbed out on shaking legs. Silas started up the trail on foot, leading the horses. The sisters followed because they had no choice, because there was nowhere else to go, because sometimes survival meant walking toward your fear instead of running from it. The trail crested the ridge, opened into a clearing, and Eleanor stopped so suddenly that Catherine bumped into her from behind. Below them, nestled in a mountain valley where a stream ran clear and cold, stood a homestead. Not a rough cabin thrown together by someone passing through, a real homestead, a sturdy log house with glass windows and a stone chimney, outbuildings that looked solid and well-maintained. A chicken coop, a small barn, garden plots laid out and ready for planting, corrals for animals, a root cellar with a heavy door. Everything a family would need, not just to survive, but to live, to build a future, to call a place home. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Behind her, she heard Mary gasp. Catherine said something that might have been a prayer or a curse. "I don't understand," Eleanor whispered. Silas stood beside them, looking down at the homestead with an expression she couldn't read. "Been building it for 2 years, since I heard your uncle was making plans." He paused, then added quietly, "Someone should have done it for my sister. Nobody did, so I did it for you." He started down the trail toward the homestead, leaving the sisters standing frozen on the ridge. Eleanor looked at Catherine, at Mary, at young Sarah, saw her own confusion and desperate, fragile hope reflected in their faces. This didn't make sense. Men didn't do things like this. Men didn't spend 2 years building homes for strangers, didn't buy women at auction just to set them free. Unless they were trying to save someone they'd failed to save before. "Come on," Eleanor said softly to her sisters. "Let's see what he's built." They followed Silas down into the valley, toward the homestead that waited like a promise, or perhaps a second chance. The morning sun caught the windows and made them shine like hope, and despite everything, despite the auction block and the terror and the long, uncertain journey, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. She felt the faintest possibility that maybe, just maybe, the world still contained miracles after all. The homestead stood solid and real in the mountain valley, and four broken sisters walked toward it, with their hearts caught somewhere between fear and something that might, in time, become belief. Winter arrived with a fury that tested everything Silas had taught them. The first major storm struck 2 weeks after his departure, burying the homestead under 3 feet of snow in a single night. Eleanor woke to an eerie silence, the kind that only comes when the world is muffled under a heavy blanket of white. They spent that first day digging out, clearing paths between buildings, ensuring the animals had access to food and water. Catherine's lessons in cabin maintenance proved invaluable when they discovered a weak point in the barn roof that needed immediate reinforcement before the weight of snow caused collapse. The sisters fell into new rhythms without Silas there to guide them. Eleanor found herself naturally taking the leadership role, making decisions about rationing supplies and planning for the months ahead. Catherine handled the physical labor that kept their buildings sound against the relentless cold. Mary managed their food stores with careful precision, making sure nothing spoiled or was wasted. And Sarah, surprisingly, became their keeper of morale. Her songs and stories in the long evenings kept darkness at bay more effectively than any fire. They read from the few books Silas had left them, taking turns in the evenings. They learned to card and spin wool from an old spinning wheel they found in the loft. They mended clothes and told stories, and slowly built a life that was theirs alone. But isolation weighed heavy some days. Mary struggled the most with loneliness, sometimes staring out the window for hours at the snow-covered mountains. "Do you think anyone even remembers we exist?" she asked one grey afternoon. "Silas remembers," Sarah said quietly. "He's up there somewhere, probably thinking about us." Eleanor wondered about that too. Was he alone in his cabin, wondering if they'd survived the storms? Did he regret leaving them? Or was he simply relieved to return to his solitary life? The answer came in unexpected ways. One morning, Eleanor found fresh firewood stacked near their door, far more than they'd cut themselves. Another time, tracks in the snow led to a deer carcass left hanging in their barn, already gutted and ready for butchering. Silas was watching over them still, leaving supplies without making contact, respecting their independence while ensuring their survival. Catherine spotted him once, a distant figure on a ridgeline against the winter sky. He stood there for several minutes, just watching the homestead, then disappeared into the trees. She didn't tell the others for days, not wanting to disturb the complicated feelings that knowledge might bring. 6 weeks into winter, a storm struck with unusual violence. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at the cabin's roof and walls. Catherine went out to secure the barn door. It had broken loose and was slamming repeatedly against the frame. Eleanor watched from the window, ready to go help if needed. Then she saw Catherine slip on ice, fall hard. Her sister tried to stand, fell again. Something was wrong with her leg. Eleanor grabbed her coat and ran out into the storm. Together with Mary, they got Catherine back inside. Her right leg was bleeding badly, a deep gash where she'd fallen on something sharp, probably broken wood from the damaged barn door. Eleanor cleaned and dressed the wound, using the supplies Silas had left, following instructions from his notebook. But as the hours passed, Catherine developed a fever. By nightfall, she was delirious, the wound angry and inflamed despite Eleanor's best efforts. Eleanor sat vigil through the night, changing cold compresses on Catherine's forehead, checking the wound repeatedly for signs of improvement. Mary brewed medicinal teas from the herbs Silas had taught them to recognize. Sarah prayed with a fervor that broke Eleanor's heart. By the third night, Catherine's fever had reached dangerous levels. She thrashed in her bed, calling out for their parents, for Silas, for help that Eleanor couldn't provide. Eleanor stood at the window, staring up at the mountain where the signal fire waited. "We should light it," Mary said from behind her. "Catherine needs real help. The storm hasn't broken. He might not see it. And even if he does, can he reach us in this weather? We have to try." Eleanor looked at her sister burning with fever, thought about what Silas had said. Signal fire for real emergencies. This qualified. But lighting that fire felt like admission that she'd failed, that she couldn't protect her sisters after all. Catherine cried out again, and Eleanor made her decision. She wrapped herself in every layer she owned and headed out into the storm toward the hilltop. The climb was brutal. Wind-driven snow blinded her. The cold bit through her clothes and turned her fingers numb. Twice she fell, had to drag herself back to her feet. But she kept climbing, kept pushing, because Catherine's life depended on it. The fire pit was exactly where Silas's map indicated, protected somewhat by a ring of stones. Eleanor's hands shook as she arranged the kindling he'd left there, struck flint to steel over and over until finally a spark caught. She fed the small flame carefully, building it until it roared against the storm, a beacon visible for miles if anyone was watching. She stood there until she was certain the fire would hold, then staggered back down to the cabin. Mary met her at the door, helped her inside. Eleanor collapsed near the hearth, shaking violently from cold and exhaustion. "Will he see it?" Sarah asked. "I don't know. We did what we could." They returned to Catherine's bedside. Her fever seemed to have peaked, holding steady at a dangerous level but not climbing higher. Eleanor held her sister's hand and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, that everything would be all right, that help was coming, that they wouldn't lose each other after surviving so much. Dawn came grey and cold. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world buried in snow and ice. Eleanor dozed fitfully in the chair beside Catherine's bed, jerking awake at every sound. Around mid-morning, Mary shook her shoulder. "Someone's coming." Eleanor rushed to the window. A figure on horseback was approaching through the deep snow, moving with purpose and speed despite the difficult conditions. Even at a distance, she recognized him. Silas had seen the signal. He was coming. Eleanor felt something break open in her chest, relief so profound it was almost painful. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone. Even when Silas had left them to their independence, he'd been watching, waiting, ready to come if they needed him. She opened the door as he rode into the yard, and the look on his face, concern and determination, and something deeper she couldn't quite name, told her everything she needed to know about the man who'd saved them twice now. "It's Catherine," Eleanor called out. "She's hurt bad. Fever won't break." Silas was off his horse before she finished speaking, pulling bags from his saddle. "Show me." They worked together through the day. Silas cleaned and redressed the wound with supplies he'd brought, gave Catherine medicine Eleanor had never heard of. Techniques for bringing down fever that went beyond anything in his notebook. He worked with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who'd saved lives in circumstances far worse than a mountain cabin in winter. By evening, Catherine's fever finally broke. She slept peacefully for the first time in days. The crisis passed. Eleanor sagged with relief, realized she was crying without quite knowing when the tears had started. Silas put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good. The signal fire, getting her inside, keeping her alive this long. You did real good." "I was so scared," Eleanor admitted. "Thought we might lose her." "Fear means you love her. That's not weakness. That's what makes you strong enough to climb a mountain in a storm." He stayed that night, sleeping by the fire to watch over Catherine. Eleanor woke several times to find him sitting alert, checking on her sister, making sure the crisis didn't return. In the firelight, she studied his profile and understood something she'd been trying to deny. She'd started to care about this man. Not just gratitude for what he'd done, but something deeper, something that scared her almost as much as Catherine's fever had. Silas stayed for 3 days, while Catherine recovered, sleeping in the barn as before, but present in ways that made the cabin feel less isolated. He brought fresh meat from his stores, helped repair the barn door that had caused Catherine's injury, and reinforced several weak points in their defenses against winter. On the second evening, as Catherine slept peacefully and the younger sisters occupied themselves with mending by the fire, Silas and Eleanor found themselves alone on the cabin's small porch. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "You've done well here," Silas said, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. "Better than I hoped, honestly. Most people raised in towns can't adapt to mountain winters. We had a good teacher," Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter, "and strong motivation. This is our home now. We weren't going to let winter take it from us." Silas nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. Then his expression grew more serious. "There's something you should know. When I rode down to check on you after I saw the signal, I passed through the lower valley. Saw tracks riders. At least 3 of them, maybe more. Recent, just before the last storm." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Could have been anyone. Trappers, prospectors. Could have been. But they were asking questions in Timber Ridge about a month back, about the auction, about where I might have taken you. He paused, weighing his words. "Your uncle's been drinking heavy, making threats, talking about how he was robbed of his property, how he means to get recompense." The fear Eleanor had thought she'd left behind in Timber Ridge came flooding back. "You think he'd come here? In winter? Man, drunk and angry enough, might try anything. More likely he'll wait for spring, but we should be prepared." Silas turned to face her. "I can teach you more about defending this place, and I should tell you something I've been putting off." "What?" He was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his coat and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from handling. He handed it to Eleanor. Even in the dim light from the cabin window, she could make out the image: a young Silas with a girl who must have been Emma, and a woman who looked somehow familiar. "That's my mother," Silas said. "And Emma, taken a year before Emma was sold." Eleanor studied the photograph more closely, something nagging at her. The woman's face, the shape of her eyes, the way she held herself. "Your mother looks like your mother did." "I know." Silas's voice was rough. "Took me years to track Emma after she was sold. Found out she died in childbirth, but the baby lived. A girl. Emma's daughter was taken by her mother-in-law, raised as her own. That baby was named Grace." The photograph slipped from Eleanor's fingers. Silas caught it before it fell. Eleanor stared at him, her mind refusing to process what he'd just said. "My mother," she whispered. "You're saying my mother was Emma's daughter, your grandmother, which makes me your great-uncle by blood." He carefully put the photograph away. "I didn't tell you before, because I didn't think I had the right. I failed Emma, let her be sold, couldn't save her. Didn't figure I deserved to claim kinship with her bloodline." Eleanor's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on the porch step. "All this time we're family, real family." "Yes, been watching over you from a distance since you were born. Your parents never knew I thought it was better that way. But when they died and Jasper took over, I couldn't stand aside anymore. Built this place for Emma's granddaughters, the family I couldn't protect before." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, hot against her frozen cheeks. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted you to be free, not obligated by blood or guilt. Wanted you to have this place as yours, not as something you owed me for." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold. "But with danger possibly coming, you deserved to know the truth." Eleanor thought about her mother, the woman who'd raised her with such love and strength. Had Grace known about Emma, about the tragedy that preceded her birth? Probably not. But she'd carried Emma's strength in her blood, passed it to her daughters. "The others need to know," Eleanor said finally. "Tomorrow. Let Catherine rest tonight." They sat in silence, and Eleanor felt the weight of revelation settling over her. Not just saved by a stranger's charity, but protected by family. Blood calling to blood across years and miles, and tragedy. "Does this change things?" Silas asked quietly. "Knowing we're kin?" Eleanor considered. "Did it change anything?" She'd already started caring about this man, already felt connected to him through what he'd done. Now she knew why that connection felt so right. It was written in their shared blood, in Emma's legacy that lived in both of them. "It explains why you stayed awake all night watching over Catherine," she said. "Why you climbed down from your mountain in a storm. Why you built this place at all." "Would have done it anyway," Silas said. "Blood or not. What was being done to you was wrong. But it was easier because we're family." The next morning, with Catherine awake and clear-headed, Silas gathered all 4 sisters and shared the truth. He showed them the photograph, the documents he'd carefully preserved, the evidence of their connection. Mary wept openly. Sarah hugged him with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd found a grandfather. Catherine, still weak from her injury, simply took his hand and held it. "You're not alone anymore," she said. "None of us are." Silas stayed 2 more days, teaching them defense strategies and ways to fortify the homestead. He showed Eleanor hidden approaches to the property, good positions for keeping watch, places where attackers might try to come through. He gave Catherine his best tools and weapons. To Mary, he gave seeds from Emma's favorite flowers, preserved all these years. And to Sarah, he promised to visit more often. Before he left, he pulled Eleanor aside one final time. "If trouble comes, you light that signal fire, I'll come running. We're family now, admitted, acknowledged. That means something." Eleanor watched him ride away, back to his lonely cabin in the high country. But he wasn't as alone as he'd been, and neither were they. They had each other, blood family discovered through tragedy and redemption. The mountains held their peace for now, but Eleanor knew that peace was temporary. Spring would come, and with it, possibly Uncle Jasper and whatever revenge he'd been planning. But when that day came, they wouldn't face it alone. They had family now fierce and tested, and ready to defend what they'd built together. Late winter brought a visitor that changed everything. Eleanor was splitting firewood behind the cabin when she heard Catherine's call, urgent but not panicked. She set down the axe and came around front to find a rider approaching, his badge catching the pale sunlight. U.S. Marshal. Eleanor's first thought was trouble, but the man's posture suggested official business rather than threat. He was older, weathered in the way of men who'd spent decades on horseback, and he rode with the easy confidence of someone who knew these mountains. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Name's Marshal Hiram Davies. Looking for Silas Brennan. Heard he might be in these parts." Eleanor's heart hammered. Had Silas done something wrong? Was he wanted? "What's your business with him?" Davies studied her carefully, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "You're the Whitfield sisters, the ones from the auction." It wasn't a question, so Eleanor didn't answer. She simply waited, Emma's rifle within easy reach, inside the cabin if needed. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Davies said, seeming to read her tension. "Known Silas for 20 years, used to ride together, back when he was still wearing a badge. I need to warn him about something, and I need to do it quick." Catherine emerged from the cabin, followed by Mary and Sarah. 4 sisters standing together, as they always did when facing uncertainty. "He saved you, didn't he? Bought your freedom and brought you here." "He gave us a home," Eleanor said carefully. "What do you want with him?" Davies dismounted, moved slowly to show he meant no threat. "There's a man named Marcus Hendricks heading this way. He's been tracking Silas for years, and he finally picked up the trail. Has 6 hired guns with him, maybe more. They were spotted near Timber Ridge 2 days ago, asking questions." Eleanor felt the world tilt. "Why? What does Silas have to do with this man?" "It's a long story, and I should tell Silas first. Where is he?" Eleanor exchanged looks with her sisters. Trust or caution. The badge said law, but the frontier had taught them that badges didn't always mean justice. Yet something in Davies's manner, the genuine concern in his voice, suggested he truly was Silas's friend. "His cabin's higher in the mountains, Half day's ride northeast. Eleanor made a decision. I'll take you there. Eleanor? Catherine started to protest. Someone needs to warn him. Better it's someone who knows the trail. She looked at Davies. But we're coming back here, and if this Hendricks comes while we're gone, my sisters know how to defend themselves. Davies nodded slowly. Fair enough. We should leave now. Eleanor saddled one of their horses. They had two now. Gifts Silas had brought during his visits through the winter. She grabbed Emma's rifle, supplies for the journey, and Silas's map. Mary pulled her aside before she left. Be careful, and bring him back safely. The ride through the snow-covered mountains gave Eleanor time to question Davies. At first he was reluctant to share details, but gradually he opened up, perhaps recognizing that she deserved to know what danger might be coming to her family. Silas and I were U.S. Marshals together in the Montana Territory back in the 60s, Davies began. Good men doing hard work in harder country. Silas was the best I ever rode with, fair, tough when he needed to be, but never cruel. Had a strong sense of what was right. He paused, guiding his horse around a fallen tree. Then his sister was sold. Emma. She was just 15, sold by their stepfather to a man named Cole Hendricks. Silas tried everything legal to get her back, went to judges, lawyers, anyone who'd listen. But Hendricks had money and connections. The law said it was a legal transaction. Eleanor felt sick. The same law that had failed to protect Emma had nearly failed to protect her and her sisters. Silas tracked them down anyway, Davies continued. Found Emma 2 years later. She'd had a baby, but she was broken body and spirit. Hendricks had used her hard. She died 6 months after Silas found her, from complications of abuse. The baby was taken by Hendricks's mother, and Silas never saw her again. Grace, Eleanor whispered. My mother. Davies turned sharply in his saddle. You know about that? Silas told us recently. We're his family, Emma's granddaughters. Understanding flooded Davies's face. That's why he built the homestead. That's why he saved you from the auction. He's been trying to protect Emma's bloodline. What happened to Cole Hendricks? Silas found him in a town in Colorado, confronted him legally. There was a trial self-defense, they ruled. But Hendricks's brother Marcus never accepted that verdict, swore revenge. Silas disappeared into these mountains to keep anyone else from getting caught in the vendetta. And now Marcus has found him. Found all of you, Davies corrected grimly. That's why I'm here. Marcus doesn't just want Silas dead, he wants him to suffer first. That means going after anyone Silas cares about. They rode harder, pushing the horses as much as they dared on the treacherous trail. The afternoon sun was slanting through the pines when they finally reached Silas's cabin, a simple structure built into the mountainside, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Silas emerged before they reached the door, rifle ready, then lowered it when he recognized them. Eleanor? Davies? His eyes widened with understanding. This isn't a social call. Marcus Hendricks, Davies said simply. The color drained from Silas's face. He looked at Eleanor, and she saw real fear there for the first time, not for himself, but for them. How close? 2 days behind me, maybe less. He's got 6 guns with him, Silas. This isn't like the old days. He's prepared for war. Silas leaned against the cabin wall, suddenly looking every one of his years. Eleanor moved to his side instinctively, took his arm. We need to get back to the homestead. The others are alone. No. Silas straightened, his tactical mind already working. We move you away from here entirely. Find a safe place to hide until... We're not running. Eleanor's voice was firm. That's our home. You built it for us. We're not abandoning it. Eleanor, you don't understand what Marcus is capable of. I understand you've been running from this for 15 years. I understand he's coming, whether we hide or not. And I understand that together we're stronger than apart. She met his eyes. We're family, Silas. That's what you taught us. Family doesn't run. Davy spoke up. She's right about one thing. The homestead is defensible. Good, high ground, clear sightlines, solid buildings. Better than trying to hide in the open. Silas looked between them, conflict clear on his face. Eleanor could see him trying to protect them, trying to shoulder this burden alone, as he'd done for so many years. But she also saw the moment he accepted what she was saying, that he wasn't alone anymore, that he had family worth fighting for, and family willing to fight beside him. "We need to move fast," he said finally. "Marcus will find the homestead, probably already has scouts watching it. We need to get back there, fortify, prepare for siege." They packed quickly, Silas grabbing weapons, ammunition, supplies he'd stored for emergencies. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor noticed something on his table. More documents, more photographs. One showed Emma with a man Eleanor didn't recognize. "Cole Hendricks," Silas confirmed quietly. "Kept it as reminder of what I failed to prevent. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe holding on to the past is what brought Marcus to your door. Or maybe it brought us to this moment for a reason." Eleanor touched the photograph. Emma's granddaughters, standing with her brother, defending the home built in her memory. Maybe this is how we honor her, by not letting her death mean nothing. Silas looked at her with something like awe. "You sound like her, strong in ways that matter. Then let's be strong enough to end this. For Emma, for all of us." They rode out as afternoon light turned golden, 3 riders racing against time and fate. Behind them, Silas's cabin stood empty, perhaps for the last time. Ahead, somewhere in these mountains, Marcus Hendricks and his men were closing in. But Eleanor felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not fear, though there was plenty of that. Not just determination, though she had that too. What she felt was purpose. She'd been saved from one auction block for a reason. She'd been given this family for a reason. And now she'd defend them with everything Emma's blood had given her: courage, strength, and the absolute refusal to be anyone's victim ever again. The mountains held their breath as 3 riders descended toward the homestead. Winter was ending, spring was coming, and with it a reckoning 15 years in the making. They reached the homestead as the sun touched the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and blood. Catherine saw them coming and rushed out, relief flooding her face when she saw Eleanor was safe. Then she noticed the grim expressions, the urgency in their movements, and understood immediately that relief was premature. "Trouble's coming," Eleanor said as she dismounted. "We need to prepare. Now." Inside the cabin, Silas spread his map on the table while Davies explained the situation to Catherine, Mary, and Sarah. Eleanor watched her sisters' faces as they learned about Marcus Hendricks, about the vendetta that had followed Silas for 15 years, about the men with guns who were coming to destroy everything they'd built. Sarah went pale but didn't cry. Mary's hands trembled, but she kept them clasped tight. Catherine's jaw set in the determined way Eleanor knew meant her sister was ready to fight. They'd all come so far from the terrified girls on the auction block. Now they'd prove just how far. "How long do we have?" Catherine asked. "A day if we're lucky," Davies said. "Maybe less. Marcus isn't subtle when he's close to his goal. He'll come hard and fast." Silas pointed to positions on the map. "The homestead has natural advantages. Elevated ground, single main approach, good sightlines. Buildings provide cover and crossfire positions. But we're outnumbered 7 of them against the 6 of us. 4 shooters," Eleanor corrected. "Mary and Sarah aren't trained for combat." "We can learn fast," Sarah said, her young voice steady. "You did." Silas looked at the youngest sister with something like pride. "You've got courage, but courage without training gets people killed." He turned to Davies. "The root cellar, its reinforced hidden entrance. We can put the younger ones there if it comes to direct assault." "I can shoot," Mary insisted. "I've been practicing since you left." "Practicing on targets and shooting at people are different things," Silas said gently. "But having you ready as backup isn't a bad idea." They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Silas and Davies assessed defensive positions, checking sightlines and cover. Eleanor and Catherine reinforced weak points in the buildings, barricaded windows that couldn't be defended, created firing positions at those that could. Mary took inventory of their supplies: ammunition, food, water, medical supplies. She organized everything for quick access, knowing that in a firefight, seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Sarah helped where she could, bringing water and supplies to the others, keeping everyone fed while they worked. As darkness fell, Silas called them together. "Need to talk strategy. Marcus will likely scout tonight, attack at dawn or dusk tomorrow when light favors attackers. We don't have enough guns to cover every approach, so we need to force them to come where we want them." He sketched in the dirt by the firelight. "Main trail is here, only good horse approach. We can fell trees, create obstacles that funnel them into kill zones. Side approaches are too steep for horses, but men on foot could try them. We'll need watchers." "I'll take first watch," Davy said. "I've done this before." "We rotate every 2 hours," Silas continued. "Stay alert, stay warm, and if you see anything, sound the alarm. Don't try to be heroes." Eleanor noticed he kept looking at her and her sisters with an expression that broke her heart. He was preparing them for a fight he'd spent 15 years trying to keep from their door. The guilt he carried was almost visible. After the others dispersed to their assigned tasks, Eleanor found Silas alone on the porch, staring out at the dark mountains. "This isn't your fault," she said quietly. "Isn't it? I brought Marcus here. I put you in danger by being part of your lives. You gave us lives worth living, worth defending." Eleanor moved to stand beside him. "If Marcus comes, he's not coming because you failed. He's coming because he's a bitter man who can't let go of the past. That's on him, not you." Silas turned to look at her, and in the lamplight from the cabin, she saw the deep lines of worry etched into his face. "I couldn't save Emma if I lose you girls too." "You won't." Eleanor surprised herself by taking his weathered hand in hers. "We're not Emma. We're not helpless victims. You made sure of that. You taught us to be strong, to fight, to survive. Now trust us to do it." He squeezed her hand, and for a moment they stood there in the mountain darkness, connected by blood and something deeper, the bond forged between someone who'd saved a life and someone who'd been saved. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," Silas said finally. "Of all of you. Then let's make sure we all survive to tell her story properly." They worked through the night in shifts. Some slept while others kept watch or continued preparations. Eleanor found herself too wired to rest, so she helped Davies construct obstacles on the main trail, fallen logs positioned to slow horses, rocks placed to create narrow passages where defenders would have clear shots. "You love him," Davies said quietly as they worked. It wasn't a question. Eleanor paused, then continued moving a log into place. "He's family. That's not what I mean. And you know it." She did know it. Somewhere between the auction block and this moment, her feelings for Silas had evolved beyond gratitude, beyond family obligation. She'd started to see the man beneath the guilt and loneliness, someone strong and gentle, someone who'd spent 15 years alone because he thought that's what he deserved, someone who'd built a home for strangers because he couldn't bear to see Emma's legacy end in suffering. "Doesn't matter what I feel," Eleanor said finally. "We might all be dead tomorrow, or you might all survive. Then it'll matter a great deal." Davies straightened, looked at her directly. "I've known Silas since he was your age. Never seen him care about anything or anyone the way he cares about you for, especially you. Man deserves to know he's loved before he goes into battle." "I'll tell him," Eleanor said, "after, when we've survived." That's the spirit. Dawn came cold and grey, the kind of morning where fog clung to the valleys and visibility was measured in yards rather than miles. They gathered in the cabin for what might be their last meal together. Mary had made biscuits and coffee, simple food that tasted like comfort and home. Silas assigned final positions. Eleanor, you're at the main window with Emma's rifle, best shot we have for long distance. Catherine, you're at the south window with the spare rifle. Davies and I will take the outbuilding's better angles on the approach. Mary, you're back up in the loft with my revolver. Only shoot if someone breaches the cabin. Sarah, you're in the root cellar unless we call for you. That's non-negotiable. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but Catherine put a hand on her shoulder. Someone needs to survive to tell this story. That's you, little sister. That's the most important job. They took their positions as the sun burned through the fog. Eleanor settled at her window, Emma's rifle loaded and ready, spare ammunition within reach. She could see the trail clearly, the obstacles they'd placed, the kill zones they'd created. Now it was just waiting. The waiting was the hardest part. Hours crawled by, the sun climbed higher, tension stretched tight enough to snap. Eleanor's hands cramped from gripping the rifle, but she didn't dare relax. Then Catherine's quiet voice. Movement. Southeast ridge. Eleanor shifted position, caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off metal. Riders. At least 5, maybe more. They'd come. Marcus Hendricks led them. Eleanor could tell by the way the others deferred to him how he directed their movements with hand signals. They stopped at the tree line, studying the homestead. Marcus would be seeing the obstacles, the defensive positions, realizing this wouldn't be the easy raid he'd probably expected. Good. Let him know they were ready. Marcus sent 2 men forward under a white cloth parley flag. They rode slowly, hands visible, stopping at a distance. One called out, "Silas Brennan, Marcus Hendricks wants to talk." Eleanor saw Silas emerge from the barn, rifle lowered but ready. His voice carried clearly across the distance. "Nothing to talk about. Your brother got justice. You've been chasing ghosts for 15 years. Justice." The rider's voice held mockery. "You killed him in cold blood. Self-defense. The court said so, law said so. Time to let it go, Marcus." There was movement in the tree line, Marcus himself riding forward far enough to be heard, but not close enough to be in rifle range. "You took my brother. I'll take everything you have, starting with those women you're protecting." Eleanor's blood ran cold. So Marcus knew about them, knew they were Silas's weakness. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about causing maximum pain. Silas's voice stayed steady. "They're not part of this. They're innocent." "Nobody's innocent." Marcus's shout echoed across the valley. "You made your choice 15 years ago. Now you live with it, or die with it. Either way, those women are mine." The 2 riders turned and galloped back to the tree line. Parley was over. Whatever came next would be written in gunfire and blood. Eleanor checked her rifle one more time, settled into position, and whispered a prayer to parents and grandmother she'd never met. Then she pushed fear down deep and let Emma's strength flow through her blood. The attack was coming. They were ready, and whatever happened, they'd face it as family exactly as Silas had taught them. Across the clearing, Marcus Hendricks signaled his men. The siege of the homestead was about to begin. Eleanor touched her mother's locket one last time, thought of everything that had led to this moment, the auction block, the journey into the mountains, the home built from guilt and love, the family discovered in tragedy and redemption. Then she sighted down Emma's rifle and waited for the first target to present itself. For Emma, for her sisters, for Silas. For the home they'd all built together. The waiting was over. The root cellar was cramped with all 6 of them inside. Silas came down last, helped by Davies, who'd taken a graze across his shoulder. Mary immediately tore strips from her petticoat to bandage both wounded men by the light of a single lamp. Above them, they heard the torches hit the roof, the sound of fire catching, beginning to spread. Smoke started filtering down through cracks, acrid and choking. "We have water down here, cloth for breathing," Catherine said, her voice remarkably steady. We can last until the fire burns itself out. Or until morning, Davies added. My deputy should arrive with reinforcements by dawn. I sent word before I came up here. That was news to everyone. Eleanor saw hope flicker in Sarah's eyes. If they could just hold out until help arrived, they might survive this. But Silas was shaking his head. Marcus won't wait that long. He'll have someone watching. He'll know help is coming. He'll try to force us out before then. As if summoned by his words, Marcus's voice carried down through the smoke. I know you're in there, Silas. Come out now, and I'll let the women live. Stay hidden, and I'll burn you out like rats. Eleanor met Silas's eyes in the lamplight and saw the calculations running through his mind. He was considering it sacrificing himself to save them. Don't you dare, Eleanor said firmly. We didn't come this far to lose you now. She's right, Catherine added. We fight together or not at all. Silas looked at the four sisters, Eleanor fierce and determined, Catherine wounded but unbowed, Mary tending injuries with gentle competence, Sarah scared but resolute, his family, Emma's granddaughters. Everything he'd built the homestead to protect. Then we wait, he decided. Door is reinforced, smoke vents are small, we can last longer than Marcus thinks. They settled in for what felt like an eternity. Smoke thickened, but the vents Silas had carefully engineered kept it from becoming lethal. The temperature rose uncomfortably, but stayed bearable. Above them, they heard the cabin burning, timbers cracking and falling. Each sound felt like a blow to Eleanor's heart. Hours passed. The fire sounds gradually diminished as fuel ran out. Through the small vents, Eleanor glimpsed dawn light beginning to grey the eastern sky. They'd made it through the night. Help would be coming. Then new sounds, horses, multiple riders approaching fast. Had Davies's reinforcements arrived? Eleanor felt hope surge. Federal Marshal, a voice called out. Drop your weapons. Gunfire erupted outside. Not the careful exchanges of the siege, but a sudden violent clash. Men shouting, horses screaming, the thunder of many rifles firing at once. It lasted perhaps 3 minutes, an eternity compressed into moments of terror and hope tangled together. Then, silence. Marshal Davies, the voice called again. You down there? Deputy Chen. Davies's relief was audible. We're here. We're safe. They emerged from the root cellar into a changed world. The cabin was gone, just charred timbers and smoking ruins. The barn had survived, though damaged, and scattered around the clearing were Marcus's men, 3 dead, 1 badly wounded, and Marcus himself on his knees with hands bound behind his back. Deputy Chen stood with 2 other marshals, all of them looking tired but triumphant. Got here as fast as we could, saw the fire from miles away, pushed the horses hard. Eleanor's legs nearly gave out from relief. Catherine caught her, and suddenly all 4 sisters were holding each other, crying and laughing and simply being alive. Silas limped over to Marcus, who looked up with pure hatred in his eyes. 15 years, Marcus spat. 15 years tracking you, and you win again. I didn't win anything, Silas said quietly. Your brother's still dead. My sister's still dead. All this suffering, all this violence, none of it brings anyone back. Emma would have wanted you to let it go, Eleanor said, moving to Silas's side. She would have wanted you to live, to find peace. That's what real family does. They want you to heal, not to destroy yourself with revenge. Marcus stared at her, and something in his expression cracked. Not repentance exactly, but the first glimpse of a man recognizing the futility of his choices. He didn't respond, just hung his head as Chen pulled him to his feet. We'll take them back for trial, Chen said. Marcus is looking at murder charges, attempted murder, arson. He won't see freedom again. As the marshals loaded their prisoners and wounded, Eleanor walked through the ruins of the cabin. Sarah found her mother's locket in the ashes, miraculously intact, though blackened. Mary salvaged a few metal implements from the kitchen. Catherine retrieved tools from the surviving barn. They'd lost the building, but not what it represented. Not the family they'd become, not the strength they'd discovered, not the future they'd fought so hard to protect. Silas stood at the edge of the ruins, and Eleanor went to him. His wound had been properly bandaged by one of the marshals, though he'd need better care soon. "I'm sorry," he said, gesturing at the destruction. "I built this for you, and now it's gone." "No," Eleanor said firmly, taking his hand. "You built us. You built a family. The cabin was just wood and stone. This," she gestured to her sisters, to Davies, to the land itself, "this is what you built, and this survived." Silas looked at her, and finally, the guilt that had haunted him for 15 years began to ease from his eyes. "Emma would have liked you. Emma would have been proud of you. You saved her granddaughters. You gave us freedom and strength and family. That's everything she never got, given to us in her name." The sun climbed higher, burning away the smoke and revealing the mountains in all their morning glory. They'd survived. They'd won, and now they'd rebuild together, as family, stronger than before. The marshals took Marcus Hendricks and his surviving men away in chains. Eleanor watched them disappear down the mountain trail and felt a weight she hadn't known she was carrying finally lift from her shoulders. The past was finished. The vendetta that had haunted Silas for 15 years was over at last. Deputy Chen stayed behind to help transport Silas to town for proper medical treatment. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it needed a real doctor's attention. Eleanor insisted on riding with him, leaving Catherine in charge of the homestead ruins. Catherine simply nodded, understanding without words being spoken. The ride to Timber Ridge took half a day. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness from pain and exhaustion, but whenever he woke, his eyes found Eleanor, first checking that she was real, that she was safe, that the nightmare was truly over. Dr. Martinez met them at his office, a kind man who'd treated enough frontier violence to remain calm in the face of Silas's injuries. He worked efficiently, cleaning and stitching the wound, while Eleanor held Silas's hand. The mountain man never made a sound, just gripped her fingers tight enough to leave marks. "He'll need rest and time to heal," Martinez said afterward. "And he shouldn't be alone. These wounds can turn dangerous if not properly monitored." "He won't be alone," Eleanor promised. They stayed in Timber Ridge for 2 weeks while Silas recovered. The town that had watched 4 sisters sold on an auction block now heard the full story, how a mountain man had saved them, how they'd discovered they were family, how they'd defended their home against a madman's revenge. The story spread, transformed in the telling, but the core remained true. Judge Harrison reviewed Marcus's case swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies damning. Marcus Hendricks was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, attempted murder, and arson. Before he was taken away, he asked to speak to Silas. Eleanor accompanied Silas to the jail, staying close in case the encounter turned ugly. But Marcus looked broken, his hatred finally burned out like the cabin he'd destroyed. "Your sister," Marcus said quietly. "Emma. Did she suffer?" Silas considered lying, but chose truth. "Yes, your brother made sure of it." Marcus nodded slowly. "I told myself she deserved it, that any woman my brother bought must have been willing, must have wanted it, easier than facing what Cole really was." He looked up at Silas. "I wasted 15 years avenging a monster, and I became one too." "You did," Silas agreed, "but recognizing it is a start. Not redemption, but a start." As they left the jail, Eleanor asked, "Do you think he meant it, the remorse? Doesn't matter if he did or didn't, he'll spend the rest of his life in a cell either way." Silas paused, leaning on the walking stick Martinez had given him. "What matters is that Emma's granddaughters are free and safe. That's the only justice that counts." They returned to the homestead in early spring as snow melted and the first green shoots emerged from the thawing earth. The cabin was gone, but the barn had survived, and Catherine had already begun planning the rebuilding. "Bigger this time," she said, showing Eleanor sketches she'd drawn. 5 rooms instead of 4, for all of us. Eleanor understood. Not 4 sisters anymore, but 4 sisters and Silas, the family made complete. They rebuilt through spring and summer. Marshal Davies visited twice, bringing supplies and news. Marcus's trial had made headlines across the territory, a cautionary tale about the cost of revenge. Other people came too, trappers Silas had traded with over the years, townspeople who'd heard the story and wanted to help. The homestead became a community project, people working together to raise walls and fix roofs, sharing meals and stories under the mountain sky. By autumn, the new cabin stood complete. Larger and stronger than before, built not just by one man's guilt, but by a community's care. They celebrated with a gathering, simple food and music, laughter echoing across the valley. Eleanor watched Silas surrounded by people, looking uncomfortable but genuinely happy. No longer alone, no longer hiding. That night, after everyone had left, Eleanor found him on the porch of the new cabin, looking out at the mountains. "You were right," he said, as she sat beside him, "about the homestead not being the important thing, about family being what survives." "We're starting over," Eleanor said. "All of us, you included." "I'm old, Eleanor, set in my ways, might not be easy living with me." She laughed. "We survived an auction block, a winter siege, and a madman with guns. I think we can handle a grumpy mountain man." He smiled a real smile, the kind Eleanor had seen only rarely. "Your grandmother had your spirit, that same refusal to accept defeat." "Tell me about her," Eleanor said. "Everything. I want to know Emma's story." So he did. Through the evening and into the night, Silas shared memories he'd held silent for decades. Emma's laugh, her kindness, her strength even in suffering. He told Eleanor about the girl who'd protected him when they were children, who'd never given up hope, even when sold to a monster, who'd loved her daughter with her last breaths. "She asked me to find her baby," Silas said, his voice rough with old grief. "Made me promise. Took me 5 years, but I found grace, watched her grow up from a distance, made sure she was safe and loved. When she had daughters of her own, I watched over them too. That's what I promised Emma, that her bloodline would never suffer what she suffered." "You kept your promise," Eleanor said softly. "You saved us. You gave us everything Emma never had." "We gave each other everything," Silas corrected. "You gave me family again, purpose beyond guilt. That's worth more than anything I built." Eleanor took his weathered hand, felt the calluses from years of hard work. "Stay with us, not in some cabin up the mountain, but here. Really here. Be the family you spent so long trying to protect." Silas looked at her, at this young woman who'd been a terrified girl on an auction block and was now strong enough to face down armed men, wise enough to understand what he'd needed before he knew himself. "I'd like that," he said simply. Spring came again, and with it new growth. Mary's garden flourished, with Emma's mountain flowers blooming alongside vegetables. Catherine's improvements made the homestead more efficient and comfortable. Sarah learned to read fluently, teaching herself from Silas's books, and Eleanor managed it all, the natural leader her grandmother had been. Silas taught them advanced survival skills, shared stories of Emma and the old days, and slowly, painfully slowly learned to accept that he deserved the love and family surrounding him. On the first anniversary of the auction, Eleanor gathered everyone at the grave marker they'd placed on the hill above the homestead. Not for their parents this time, though those markers stood nearby. This one was for Emma Brennan, grandmother, sister, mother, the woman whose suffering had led to their salvation. "She died alone," Eleanor said to her gathered family, "but her legacy isn't alone. It's here, in us, in what we've built. We're Emma's victory. Every day we live free and strong and together." Silas placed his hand on the stone marker, and Eleanor saw tears streak his weathered face. Catherine took his other hand. Mary and Sarah joined the circle. Davies, visiting for the ceremony, completed it. Family, Not born into it or sold into it, but chosen and fought for and earned through sacrifice and love. The mountain wind sang through the pines, carrying Emma's flowers' scent across the valley. The homestead stood strong below them, smoke rising from the chimney, chickens pecking in the yard, life thriving where once there'd been only wilderness. Eleanor looked at Silas and saw not the guilt-haunted man who'd bought 4 sisters from an auction block, but her great-uncle, wounded and healing, strong and gentle, finally at peace. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Thank you," he responded, "for giving me a reason to stop running." They walked down the hill together as the sun set golden over the mountains, returning to the home they'd built from ashes and hope. Behind them, Emma's marker stood eternal, watching over the family she'd never known but had somehow made possible through her brother's love and guilt and desperate need for redemption. The auction block was a lifetime ago. The terror and suffering were memories now, painful but past. What remained was this family gathered around a table in a mountain cabin, sharing a meal and stories and the comfortable silence of people who belonged together. Eleanor touched her mother's locket, felt the weight of generations of strength passed down through Emma's blood. They'd all been saved not by one man's gold or guilt, but by the choice to believe in second chances, to fight for family, to build something lasting from the ruins of tragedy. The homestead endured, the family thrived, and somewhere in the mountain wind, maybe Emma smiled.